Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And today I have a fantastic guest with us. She is an author, speaker, entrepreneur, and healthcare advocate. Her name is Marcia Moran, and in the true spirit of the female warrior and the FemiNinja, she is a fighter and a survivor, and she is here to share her inspiring story with us today. So, Marcia, thank you for being here, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so excited to have you on the show, and you really, truly have an amazing story to tell.
Well, thank you.
So I'm just going to turn it over to you and tell us, I think it was in 2012 that you started your own business, correct?
Yes. So I had written 50 business plans for other people. And I decided if I'm writing for other people, maybe I should write one for myself.
Yeah, good plan.
Exactly. So I finally did it and started my own business, and things were rocking and rolling. Mm-hmm. I had a good business plan for the year I was in. Mm-hmm. Sales were up, and I thought nothing could stop me. Mm. And guess what?
Something stopped you.
Something stopped me. So I woke up Sunday morning, and I felt really weird. Mm-hmm. So I reached over for my phone and texted my friend Rochelle, and I couldn't read the text. It was all funny. Huh. So I just decided I'll text her later. I put my phone down, rolled over, and I had the most incredible headache imaginable, unending. And despite the pain, I fell asleep.
Wow.
And that was the wrong thing to do. Mm. When I woke up next, I was paralyzed on my right-hand side from the top of my head down to my toes.
Jeez.
And I knew that I had to make a decision. I would either roll out of bed and try to find help, or I would give up and die.
Did you have any idea what was happening to you?
I had no idea.
Okay.
So I rolled out of bed, and I used the carpet to drag myself using my left hand across the room, and I made it to the door, which was unfortunately closed. Oh. And I had to reach up for the handle, and it was just out of my reach. But I finally got enough oomph in my reach, and it snapped open. Mm-hmm. And I was so tired that I just had to rest for a while. And eventually I had enough oomph in me to drag myself around the rug. And I made it out to the hallway. And I ran out of gas. I had nothing left.
So was anybody home with you at the time, or were you by yourself?
My husband was downstairs.
Ah, okay.
And I knew that he would come up for sodas at one point. Mm-hmm. So it was just a matter of waiting. So I don't know what it was, but something went crash. Mm-hmm. And he came upstairs, and he saw me on the floor, and he said, "Marcia, are you okay?" And I looked up at him, and that's when I found out I didn't have a voice.
Wow.
So he looked at me some more, and he said, "Can you speak to me?" And I didn't have anything, so the answer was no. And so he said, "I'm going to call 911. And at that point, I nodded yes. So when he was done calling, he looked around the upstairs to see what had happened, and he couldn't find anything. So he came out and sat by my side till the paramedics arrived.
So was he thinking that perhaps you had fallen or something?
He didn't know.
Mm.
And so the paramedics arrived, and the first thing they said was, "When did she have her stroke?"
Oh.
And so my husband and I were both flabbergasted because we didn't think about stroke at all until that point.
Mm.
So what the paramedics were trying to decide is when I had my stroke, so they could decide whether or not I could give medicine for it.
Mm-hmm.
And since I had the stroke during, a sleeping period,
Mm-hmm.
the answer was no. And it's glad for me that they didn't do it, because the medicine would have given me a second bleed.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So when they had me in the ambulance, I actually lost consciousness. So the next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital room, and I had a hospital gown on, a needle in my arm, and my husband. And that was enough. I saw my husband and I didn't feel scared anymore. I just fell asleep again.
Wow. Now let me ask you, how old were you when this happened?
53.
Wow. A stroke at 53.
Yeah.
And you had no prior medical history, or you were not high risk for stroke?
No. So I ran 3 or 4 times a week, and my eating habits were very good. I was a right weight for myself, for my body. So I had no idea that this would happen to me. So I guess I am glad that I'm alive. Yeah. And I will tell everybody that stroke can happen to anyone. So I had a carotid artery tear, mm-hmm. and a blood clot formed in the tear and then broke free. 1% to 2% of people have it, and you have no idea that it's coming. It's just there.
So you actually had a tear in your carotid artery, and it had to have been a pretty small tear, because your carotid artery is pretty important to, your life function and taking the blood supply to the brain. But it was small enough that it did clot off, and then the clot broke. So how do you think that you got the carotid artery tear?
I have no way of knowing. Okay. And the doctors didn't know either.
Wow. So did you have a severe fall prior to this, or auto accident, or? So
I've been in 5 auto accidents over the course of my life, but the last one was like in 2005 or 6. So it had been a long time since I'd had it.
Wow.
So they really don't know.
So then after being in the hospital, and there you are, you knew you're going to be okay. Your husband was there, which your husband has been an incredible support system for you during this entire time. Yeah. So tell us about what you were left with, as far as, when you were in the hospital and you're recovering, you were left with what they call aphasia.
Yeah. So aphasia is a speech impediment that happens by stroke or Alzheimer's, or not Alzheimer's, but Parkinson's, etc. And they say that if you're not cured within the first 3 months, you will probably have it for life.
Oh, wow.
So I had aphasia for 3.5 years.
So you couldn't speak at all, is that correct?
Well, I could speak, so I couldn't speak the day I had the stroke. But over time, I could speak a little bit. I could say yes, no. I could speak occasionally to answer questions. It was really dependent on what the questions was, how I was feeling. Was I tired? Maybe I was having a brain fog and I couldn't speak. It was just really different.
So the whole time this was happening, even as you were, aphasic, and maybe you could not get your words out, did you have full comprehension of what people were saying to you and what you wanted to say to them.
Yes. So I could hear everything everybody said. I could understand everything that people said to me. And so it was like I had two voices going on in my head. One was, this is what they said, and this is what I want to say back to them. And getting that voice to speak out was very hard. So I put words together that I could say. So a different voice came out of my mouth. And it was like I had two people in my head talking at the same time. It was really weird.
So you were pretty much aware that this was happening, that what you wanted to say and what you were actually saying was completely different.
Yes, exactly.
So how did you heal from that? How did you recover?
So I had 4 speech therapists over time.
Oh, okay.
And they got me to where they thought I would be okay. I was still aphasic, but they thought I'd be okay. The problem is that I wanted to speak like a normal person again. I wanted that second voice to go away. Mm-hmm. So I heard of a chiropractor who did laser therapy. Mm-hmm. And the laser therapy is supposed to help you clear up the speaking problem. Mm-hmm. So I tried them. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew that it wouldn't hurt me to try. So I went in and I laid on his table, and it was weird because he said, do the cross crawl. And so if you're doing the cross crawl, you're lifting the right leg and the left arm up over your head at the same time. And then you switch them. So it's up and down, up and down. And after the first session, I could actually speak better.
Wow.
Not great, but better.
And you knew that you were speaking better than you had been, right?
Yep. So I continued to see him. Now, and that was at the second year of my stroke. So at 3.5 years, there was another chiropractor that told me I should try neurofeedback. Mm-hmm. And he gave me the website to see what the neurofeedback was all about, because I had no idea what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. And I read the site and I go, this is really weird. It says that it helps people with ADHD, stroke, all these things. And I read some more, and it said 85% of people with traumatic brain injury feel better after this. I'm going, okay. So there's no downside. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try.
Did it explain how it works, or it just, when you were doing the research, or does it just say, it helps these people, but didn't really specifically say how?
It did say how. Okay. So it says it's like you're turning a frozen computer off and then on again.
Good way of putting it.
Right, exactly. And so I actually called the manufacturer and I talked to him, and he sent me a couple of studies that they did. So I read those as well. Mm-hmm. And I was really comfortable that it wouldn't do me any harm. And if it would do me some good, I was all for it. So I went in and the doctor got me all prepped, and that included, he took my hair up and put some really interesting stuff that felt like, I call it like the cat was licking my head.
Oh, okay. Was it like a conducting gel?
It was a conducting gel, exactly. So it's wet, sticky, kind of gritty.
Like licking your head.
Exactly. So he wanted the leads to have a clear connection. Mm-hmm. And he started the computer and the neurofeedback machine, and I could see my brainwaves going across the computer screen, but I couldn't feel anything. Okay. And so he moved the leads and he started again, and I couldn't feel anything again. But when I left that day, I could speak better.
Wow.
So after 16 sessions, I could speak normally.
Wow.
So there's only one voice in my head. And so if I think it and I say it, I'm actually thinking the same thing.
So that had to have been incredibly, not only empowering for you, but incredibly liberating. It was like you were back in, your body the way you knew it and back in your head.
Yeah.
And just
Exactly.
the ability to be able to express yourself and your needs and to be able to express yourself clearly is pretty amazing. And just the fact that you did your research and really looked to see what was out there and available to you, I really take my hat off to you, because a lot of people would not have done that. And I'm just curious, when you were working with your 4 different speech therapists, did any of them recommend you trying something like neurofeedback or anything else?
No, there was no mention of neurofeedback until I got the, so I went to the chiropractor for actually acupuncture.
Okay.
And he started doing neurofeedback when he recommended it to me. And he is the only person I have ever been to who's ever told me about neurofeedback. And I'm actually a little bit disappointed because it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed in that, because I would think that the medical profession would really be able to embrace it at this point, because it does get a lot of attention and it is incredibly beneficial.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you're dealing with, the medical profession, traditional Western medicine, they're not as well versed or maybe not as supportive as some of the alternative therapies that are out there. And that's another reason why I wanted you on the show. There are many reasons, but especially because you had so much of that alternative therapy helping you recover to where you are right now. And if you hadn't done that, you might not be here talking to us right now.
I wouldn't be here talking to you. I probably would look at the computer screen and blank out.
Kind of like I did a little bit earlier today.
Yeah, well, it happens.
Yeah, I can make fun of myself. It's fine. If you can't laugh at yourself, what's the point in going forward? And speaking of going forward, you did actually write a book
I did.
about your experience.
Yes, I did. So when I got out of the hospital, I looked for books to read, and there was nothing that told you anything about the experience. So I decided to write a book that had only my experience, but also my husband's, my sister, a bunch of friends, a doctor too, because people have a different feeling when someone that they know and love has a stroke. And then on top of that, I decided to put some, well, what did we learn from the advocate standpoint? So people can have a place to start when they go into the hospital. And my husband was in such a poor place when we went into the hospital because he didn't know anything. So he had to learn day by day by day.
Under all that pressure at the same time, wondering, what's going to happen to you and if you're going to recover, and just the stress of that is just pretty amazing. And then having to maneuver through the medical system, which isn't easy.
Right. And so I wanted to make sure that people had some place to start.
I think that not only is that very beneficial and educational for people who might be going through that, or has a loved one who's dealing with that, but it's also, again, it's just so empowering to be able to have that kind of information, especially when it's coming from somebody who not only survived the stroke but thrived through it once you got to the other side. So you've got the book, which is an incredible resource, as well as I think probably a memoir, as well as some how-to in it. So it's pretty comprehensive. And the name of the book is Stroke Forward.
Yes.
Okay, so our listeners can go to strokeforward.com, and that's your website, right?
Yes. and they can order it on Amazon.com. So they just type in stroke forward and it takes you right to the book.
When you were going through your recovery and still struggling with aphasia, could you ever have imagined yourself as an author and writing about the experience?
So I started writing on my first anniversary of the stroke.
Okay.
Did I believe I'd be published? No. Do I believe that I am published? Well, I do, because I see the book sitting across from me right now. Uh-huh. But I really have a difficult time actually believing it.
I love the cover, by the way. I did check it out.
So I think that that's what every stroke survivor should do. Lift their hands up to the sky and just breathe in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you go through something like that, which truly is, a near-death experience, it really does change your perspective, doesn't it?
It surely does.
I mean, the little things that, we might find annoying all of a sudden are like, well, at least I can experience this. I'm here, and thank God for that.
Well, okay, so going after an experience like the stroke, mm-hmm. I learned that I can actually do anything I set my mind to. It might take me longer. It might be done differently, but so here is a person who never really thought about writing a book and being read by the public. Okay. And I'm telling you, it is possible.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I love about you is not only, of course, you are a published author now, and you speak so eloquently and so clearly, is that you are actually even launching a speaking career, and you went from being 3.5 years of aphasic to being a lead or a director in a Toastmasters group. Is that right?
That is right. In fact, we are gearing up for our area contest next Saturday.
Do you want to pinch yourself sometimes and say, is this really happening to me?
Yeah, I do, actually.
Because, it's just remarkable. What an incredible story and incredible recovery. And I think it's just so encouraging for the people who are listening to this to know that you can get through something as debilitating as that was a pretty severe stroke that you had. And to be, so healthy and functional and have a vibrant life afterwards is pretty amazing, and really something that people can look toward as a beacon of hope.
Yeah, so I think that every stroke patient needs to understand that as long as they think that they can get better every single day, mm-hmm. they will. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that people will hear my voice and think, I can get better, whether they've had a stroke or something else. As long as you have a positive attitude, that's all it takes.
That is so important, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that actually even goes back into the neurology and the neurofeedback. The positive messages that you're giving yourself, your brain doesn't decide if it's true or false or possible or whatever. It just takes it in, again, like a computer. And you keep telling yourself day after day after day, I'm getting better, I will get better, I will get better. And your brain just processes that information and actually changes the synaptic connection. So thank you so much for bringing that up. And there's something else I wanted to ask you about, because I thought this was really, really a great story. Maybe you don't think so, but I did. Is that you actually gave a public or a speech to a group of stroke survivors at Healthsouth.
Yeah. So I was not terrified.
Well, good for you.
Okay. So after being in Toastmasters for almost 4 years, I decided that I would talk to stroke groups. So I had my speech laid out. It was 40 minutes in length. And I was sitting in my office that day, and I go, there's something wrong here. I like my speech, but I don't know, something isn't right. So I saw something. It's my belt. So I saw my belt sitting on my dresser. And I go, that's what they used to take me on my first walk around the hospital.
The gait belt.
I think I'll take that. And then I looked around some more and I saw some marbles and I go, those look like, well, they're not really marbles. They look like eyes.
Okay.
And I thought, maybe I'll take those too. So I wound up taking 4 or 5 things. And when I got to the hospital or the rehab hospital, I asked the stroke patients, what do you want to see? So I have this speech that I prepared, and it's 40 minutes long, or have these things that I used when I was going through my stroke. And they say, we want both.
Oh, no pressure for you though, right?
I said, okay. So I told them about the stroke using both my speech and the 4 or 5 things that I took. And I found that the more I talked to them, the deeper we went. And so I told them about some things I didn't like telling people about because it's really personal. Mm-hmm. But I found that telling the personal stories to them was really fulfilling, uplifting. It was better for me than I thought.
Did it almost feel cathartic or healing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was really cathartic. And so that is really where I changed the way I'm talking to people. Well, I guess I'm not really through talking to people. I barely started before the COVID virus.
Oh, yeah. Well, that kind of put everybody on a standby for a while, right?
Right. But I think it will change the way I do talk to groups because there are some people that have just had their strokes in there, and they have to know what it was like for me when I was at my worst. Mm-hmm. And they can understand how far I came. Mm-hmm. And I'm still coming. You know, I'm still overcoming some aspects of my stroke. I'm not 100% yet, but I will be someday.
Oh, I know you will be. So I love the fact that you brought, you know, like the gait belt and the marbles that look like eyes and the other things that, you know, from your recovery, because that's something that it's very tangible. And you can talk to people and reach, you know, a certain percentage of your audience. But when you have visuals like that, something that they can really cling to, or like an anchor to really weight some of the things and the messages that you're sending is really very powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah, so good for you for figuring that out. You knew it, but you didn't even know you knew it.
Well, it's a good thing I have these things sitting around the house.
Well, it's so funny because you figured it out on the fly because, you know, you gave them an either or. And they said, oh, we want both. So there you were, you know, just trying to put it together right there at that moment. You were really thinking on your feet.
Yeah, well, so that is one thing that I think Toastmasters has really done for me, is that I have to come up with on the spot speeches every now and then when someone shows up and doesn't have a speech that they were supposed to give. It's like, okay, I guess I'll give one.
Yeah, I was in Toastmasters for about a year. So yeah, I remember that. It's really good for thinking on your feet. But to do it in a way that's so meaningful to your audience is pretty impressive. Now, let me ask you this. When you did start Toastmasters, were you still struggling with aphasia? You must have been.
I was. So I joined Toastmasters in 2016.
Oh, wow. 2 years after your stroke.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I didn't actually do my first speech until 7 months in to my 7 months in.
Wow.
So I actually didn't even know at that time if I would be able to speak or not. So I had a set of slides in my speech, and I was thinking I'll either get up there and do everything perfectly, or I'll go in there and not say a word so they can at least look at the slides. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't anything written on the slides. It was just pictures.
You really are a ninja. You just figure stuff out.
So after not being able to speak, you realize, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do my best. And if I speak, great. If I don't speak, it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. So I got in there, I stood up, and I said my first sentence, and I went, woohoo, inside.
Did your fellow, Toastmasters know what you were going through? I mean, they must have known your history.
Well, they knew my history, but, again, I hadn't been up for a speech yet. Uh-huh. So they didn't actually know what they were going to get. Okay. So I started the second sentence, and I stopped midway through and going, uh-oh, this is not good. I started the second sentence again, and I stopped. It's like, okay, this is really not good. So on the sixth time, I actually made it all the way through the sentence. I made it then all the way through the speech. And when I sat down, I felt so good.
You're giving me chills right now, just hearing this story. I'm just so blown away by it. It's amazing.
So, thank you, by the way. So, when I sat down, I felt really proud of myself. And it wasn't that the speech was good, because it wasn't. Mm-hmm. But I'd actually finished a speech. And when I stood up to do the speech, I didn't know if I'd say the first sentence. So, you know what I'm most proud of? They clapped. Oh. They said, good speech. Even though it wasn't, they said good speech.
Did you cry?
No.
Oh, well, good for you. I probably would have, although I like to pretend that I don't have emotions and I never cry in public.
Yeah.
I save it for when I'm in the bathtub.
That's interesting, because I didn't used to cry. Uh-huh. And then I had my stroke, and then I cried at everything.
Oh. Well, it does kind of soften you up, or it tenderizes you a little bit. And I think that, even, or especially as women and as business women, I think we have a little bit of a hard shell that, we just don't want people to see our vulnerabilities or our soft side. And we just kind of have to barrel on through. I mean, I remember one time I absolutely lost it in my acupuncturer's office. It was a woman I was going to. And I mean, I just lost it. And she had said to me when I got there, she says, oh, you seem a little bit down today. Is everything okay? And that's all she had to say. And I thought, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. I was bawling like a baby. And I says, I'm sorry, I never cry in front of people. And she goes, oh, I'm so happy that you feel safe enough in my office that you could cry in front of me. And I thought, well, I'm not thrilled about it, but I'm glad you are. But it was pretty funny.
Yeah. So I know what you feel, because so after the stroke, I went in, and my physical therapist was in the women's club. And every time I went into her office, for some reason, I just cried for months on end. It was embarrassing. Uh-huh. And I couldn't do anything about it. So
yeah, it's sometimes you just got to let it out.
Yeah. And she says she learned something from me that day, or I should say those days.
And what was that?
Well, for one thing, I was showing how vulnerable I was. Mm-hmm. And she saw me at my bare minimum.
Mm-hmm. At your worst.
At my worst. And she thought it was beautiful. It told her it's okay for me to cry when she felt bad wherever she was.
Oh, see, you learn so much from your patients. I mean, that I'm a recovering physical therapist. And when I had my own practice, I did not do traditional PT. I did alternative PT. Mm-hmm. But you just learn so much from the people that you work with. And there were so many times I would go home and I'd go, wow. I mean, that was pretty amazing. So, right. Being in the healing profession can be both terrifying and exhausting, but it can also be very uplifting at the same time. So I'm sure she loved working with you.
Yeah. She turned into a friend.
I figured. Yep. So there was another thing that you had told me when I first met you, and we had a very wonderful phone conversation. And you said, and this is what I consider one of the take-home points that I actually wrote down even when I first spoke with you, is that you have a choice when you're in a situation like what you were in.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, please.
Okay. You could put yourself in situations where you can try and fail, which is exactly what you did, with Toastmasters and so many other things that you did as you were recovering, or you can stay at home and never move forward.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty profound.
Okay, so when I was first released from the rehab hospital and I could barely walk, I could choose not to walk again, or I could choose to work on my stride every single day. Mm-hmm. And I always made that choice that I have to work hard because I want to walk like a normal person again. Mm-hmm. When my gait was better, I went, okay, now I have to make sure that my arm swings again, because I was walking and my arm was straight down. It didn't move at all. And so I think that if you look at where you're at and you're going, okay, I can barely walk and my arm isn't swinging and I can't do this and I can't do that, you can look at the bad things and go, okay, so what is the smallest I can do that will put me in the right place for doing even more tomorrow?
And that small thing can be almost like so minute, but you have to celebrate every tiny little step that you take, or every tiny little accomplishment or milestone.
Yeah. So I actually learned how to snap my fingers again. And I can actually snap them at almost the same speed that I can snap my left hand.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's amazing. So your husband must be so proud of you.
He really is. And I am proud of him because he took care of me every step of the way. It didn't matter how small a step it was, he was always there.
He sounds like a great guy.
He is.
Well, Marcia, is there anything else you want to share with our audience, with our listeners?
I think I'm going to reiterate, please do everything one step at a time. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter how small that step is, as long as it's going in the right direction.
And there was one other thing I like to call your words of wisdom or your take-home points. You could laugh at everything, or you can cry.
Yeah.
And so finding the humor in, maybe it's a little inappropriate in some situations, but if you can find that ability to laugh at yourself, that's pretty healing.
Yeah. Well, again, you are in a body that doesn't work well. Mm-hmm. So you may as well laugh, because otherwise there's a lot of tears, and the tears aren't so good, at least in my house. So we laughed at even the most silly things, like when I took noodles up to my mouth and mm-hmm. I couldn't get them in. It's like, okay, guess you're washing the clothes again.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that would really be one heck of a unique experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you had a lot of them.
I did.
Are some of those experiences or some of those situations in the book, or are you saving that for another time?
Not too many of them are in the book. Some things are actually pretty personal. Mm-hmm. So maybe that will be what I speak at when I go to a rehab hospital.
Mm-hmm. Something that the patients would really appreciate and relate to, and probably like hearing about, because it makes it real. And then they're, sitting there looking at you and where you're at now. Right. That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Okay, so people can find you online at strokeforward.com. That is your website. And then, of course, they can get your book from your website, and they can also just go directly to Amazon.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, Cheryl.
Well, thank you, Marcia. Thank you so much for being here. And everyone, thank you for listening. And remember, there's nothing you can't do if you really have the positive attitude, and keep giving yourself positive messages, and to do your research. If you're in a situation where you've had either a stroke or a terrible injury or a health issue, do your own research and make sure that you have an advocate, someone who will speak for you, and vice versa, because it's always nice to know that you've got somebody who understands what you're thinking of, and if you are in a situation like that, what your wishes are. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.